Hello everyone, I am Aaron Judy. I'm going to give you a presentation on automation complacency. Found this Time cover magazine. This was in January of 1983. Time always mentions someone as the man of the year. And in 1983, they actually mentioned the machine of the year, which is the computer. So we've come a long ways since then. Defining automation, here's a definition: a machine or system that accomplishes partially or fully a function that was previously carried out partially or fully by a human operator. So what is happening is machines, computers, microprocessors are starting to take tasks away from the human operator and making those tasks automated. So what I want to do is touch about how this is happening, give you a few examples of where this is occurring that is positive and where it is occurring negative, and tie it into the whole learning and cognition atmosphere that we've really been learning over the past semester. If you look at these levels of automation, starting at 1, where the human does everything, down to level 10, we really have systems that can do levels 1 through 7. When it starts to get to 8, 9, and 10, there are very few systems that do this. Specifically, 8 computer executes, selects alternative, and informs human only if asked. You'll see that in more of your sophisticated military systems and things of that nature. You certainly don't have too many systems that are at 10, which is where the computer acts entirely autonomously, which is really what we're talking about artificial intelligence. We certainly live in an automated world. Aerospace, air traffic control systems, even some of our ground transportation systems with metros and railways are becoming highly automated. Telemedicine with robots, even virtual telemedicine, where in the military there are actually applications where a surgeon can be in the United States and conduct a surgery overseas, teleoperated surgery with a robot. So they can control that robot from the United States and actually can perform a surgery on someone laying in a hospital say in Germany. Extremely amount of automation into that, what has to happen for that to occur. We're seeing home automation systems start to pop up with Apple and various apps. If you go to Lowe's, you'll see a lot of home automation systems now, especially with refrigerators, where there are weight sensors in there, and it will tell you, depending on where you put food and supplies, it knows how much a gallon of milk weighs, etc., orange juice, and it will tell you if you're low or empty and what you need to do to go to the grocery store. It will send you a list of the things you need to go buy. Robotics almost everywhere now, specifically in the telemedicine world, and also we're starting to see them in ground transportation systems. Handheld devices in classroom and e-learning, we've talked about that a lot this semester. Pretty self-explanatory of what handheld devices are doing to our brains and how they're such a large part of our day-to-day social lives and learning lives. So we certainly live in this automated world. How can we justify automation? Really, it's improving performance while reducing cost. That's what a lot of organizations and companies are after. They want to make a profit, and to make a profit, they need to show how you, the human, can improve performance at a very low cost. FAA pilots are starting to need extra help as they fly more sophisticated systems. However, they're starting to over-rely on those systems, and we'll see some pilot shortcomings that are starting to occur. The National Transportation Safety Board, due to recent train accidents, you probably have seen some and heard of some in New York, and also Metro Railway in Washington, D.C., where some lives were lost. They're actually interested in taking the automated systems that have been integrated into the aircraft system aspect and put that into the ground systems and railways and roadways and even automobiles, as we'll see here further in the slides. What is human performance? When we really look at automation, we're trying to increase human performance and decrease workload. We have both. You need both cognitive processes and social processes to get human performance. They both are closely tied together And you can see there in a list of some of them. One of the things that I want to point out on this slide is that humans are mostly single channel systems. This means we can only do so much work, amount of work per unit at a time. If we do more things, it will take us more time. So this is where automation really comes into play, to try to help the human reduce that workload and perform more tasks efficiently. We need to be able to manage the information when we're working with automated systems. A three-piece step that occurs here. Understand how and the why part. This is really important in detecting issues. We'll see in a case study with Air France 447 how this was an issue. But a lot of times what will happen is we will get into a decision-making do loop based on the aspect that we detected the wrong problem. So if we detect the wrong problem, we will implement the wrong solutions and get into this do loop of where we're continuously trying solution after solution after solution. But the key piece, the key takeaway, is that we detected the wrong problem. So if we don't detect the right problem, we don't know what's going on. We need to have the sense of what's going on. We need to stop, look, and read. Just don't push buttons and menus. A lot of people do this with commercial devices, and they carry that knowledge set over into systems that they're working where you might have people's lives in your hands. So we can't just push buttons and expect feedback and responses. We have to really understand the system and know how and why it works the way it does. We also need to manage and prioritize information. We need to declutter. We talked about this in great length as well when we were talking about how the brain learns and how we need to prioritize tasks and not do multitasking. This ties into keeping ahead. In the aviation area, we'll call it keeping ahead of the airplane. When we perform easy tasks, we'll speed up extremely fast, but when we have to perform complex tasks, we will slow down. Very simple. A good analogy is driving your automobile down straight roads and then versus curved roads. We'll slow down to make those turns. It's very similar to how the human brain operates when performing tasks. We need to manage our response time, and then we also need to understand how managing that response time drives defensive behaviors. And this is really important in defensive driving. We can probably perform and really avoid a lot of accidents if we have defensive driving. And what is defensive driving? It's managing your response time. It's not following someone too close. It's making sure you're aware of your surroundings and you're keeping good situational awareness as you drive your vehicle. What happens when we get that task saturation? Really we'll have this task performance that will start to downgrade, and then eventually we'll see this sudden decay as this graph shows. I recently experienced this in a flight with another guy just a couple weeks ago. We were flying up to Ocala from Lakeland Linder, and as we were going along, it was a night flight. ATC at Tampa called him and gave him a frequency to change to Jack Center of 118.6. In an aircraft, there's also a transponder code. It's a 4-digit code that you put in. We were flying with code 1100, 1100. There were lots of things going on in the aircraft, lots of chatter happening, a little bit of weather. And when he got the frequency change from Tampa to change to 118.6, he actually started changing the transponder code. I watched him do it for a moment because I knew he'd become task saturated, and then I corrected him and said, hey, they gave you a frequency change, not a transponder code change. So that's where that sudden decay happens, and it can happen to any of us. It's really not dependent upon training per se, because we can only do so many things at once. How does this tie into the brain and automation? Well, we're not practicing as many steps as we used to. We're relying on the computer to do more of the practicing, the kinesthetic type of things. This reduces our memory, and we need more verbal and visual help from the computer to point us to what we need to go do. The brain, as you can see to the right, really needs auditory and visual to process information. So we're relying on the computer to give us these cues when we're not necessarily getting them from other humans or by a touch. And in my opinion, this is really what is happening, and automation is starting to replace these practices. And I'm sure that if you're school teachers, you see the issues with this in your classroom. There are certainly uses, misuses, disuses, and abuse of automated systems. A controlled flight into terrain is one of them, and the Air France 447, which we'll see. But the biggest takeaway here is that automation does not replace the human. It only changes the roles and responsibilities. We can see this in libraries that are changing. They're not becoming obsolete, but certainly it has changed their formats of how we get information from libraries. So as the quote says there at the bottom, it's certainly from some research, and many of them agreed on this, that automation is not replacing the human, but it's modifying and changing the way we think. Designers tend to automate everything because there's an economic benefit, and this hopefully increases human performance and reduces cost. But we're going to see here in this video with Air France 447 what happened. I'm going to play you the video, and then we'll talk about it for a couple moments.
Flight 447 mysteriously crashed in the Atlantic, killing 228 people. Now, with the flight recorders finally recovered from the ocean floor, we know more about what happened in the final harrowing moments of that Rio to Paris flight. Here's Nancy Cordes.
The plane's black boxes reveal that the Air France pilots, faced with conflicting speed readings, didn't know whether to speed up or slow down. At 11:10 p.m., the Airbus A330 was heading into a powerful storm 700 miles off the coast of Brazil when the autopilot disengaged and the plane began to roll to the right. The cockpit displays showed inconsistent speed readings, a sign that the external speed sensors, called pitot tubes, were malfunctioning or perhaps had iced over. "I have the controls," called one of the plane's two co-pilots. A stall warning went off, and he climbed briefly before pointing the nose down to pick up some speed. Then he leveled out and began to climb a bit, perhaps not realizing he was still going too slow. That triggered a second stall warning. But instead of pointing the nose back down, he continued to pull up.
The aircraft begins to roll. It begins to go from one side to the other side.
Mark Rosenker was chairman of the NTSB when the plane crashed in June 2009.
What we've seen in this cockpit voice recorder is two pilots extremely confused about what's happening on their flight deck, what's happening to their instrumentation.
It was now a minute and a half into the crisis, and the captain, who had been on a scheduled rest break, made it back into the cockpit. 20 seconds later, the co-pilot flying the plane said, "I don't have any more indications," most likely referring to speed readings. "We have no valid indications," confirmed the other co-pilot. As it pitched and rolled, the plane slowed even more and stalled, falling from 5 miles up for 3.5 minutes at a rate of 10,000 feet per minute, slamming belly first into the Atlantic. What would those 3.5 minutes have been like for the pilots and for the passengers?
Horrific is the only way to describe it. The aircraft was rolling. The aircraft was descending at a high rate of speed, tremendous G-force. It was horrific.
The last recorded speed right before impact was just...
So a couple of things I'd like to talk about here right quick is in the simulation you saw a yoke, center yoke. Actually in the Airbus 320 that Air France 447 was flying, they're actually side sticks. I'm not sure why CBS did the animation wrong, but they did. And these side sticks, if the co-pilot is pushing down, the left pilot stick, he also has one as well, are not linked. So you can actually have one pilot pushing down and one pilot pushing up. They believe this was part of some of the issue that was occurring. But the biggest part was they were confused of the modes and what the system was giving them. This is really a simple thing to recover from. All he would have had to have done was both of them push the nose over and come out of the stall. That's how you recover from a stall, and they would have saved the airplane and, more importantly, everybody on board. But they're confused. They didn't understand the system. Recently, Airbus has changed this procedure, and now you actually have a button that you push. So if you are the pilot in command, your stick is the only one that controls the pitch up or down or lateral left, right of the airplane.